Today, the SEC launches a probe into Coinbase. Sam Bankman-Fried is in talks to buy another crypto company. And now that the Texas power grid is stabilized, we find out how extreme weather affected crypto mining in the state. Welcome to CNBC's Crypto World. I'm Mackenzie Sigalos. Crypto prices falling yet again today as investors wait to see how high the Fed will hike interest rates tomorrow. Now, by noon Eastern, Bitcoin dropped to $20,000, Ethereum dropped to $1,300, and Uniswap fell to $6. Okay, here are some stories that you should know about. First, crypto exchange Coinbase faces a new probe by the SEC. The agency is investigating whether the platform lets customers trade cryptocurrencies that should be treated as unregistered securities. Now, Coinbase responded to the probe with its chief legal officer tweeting that the company's diligence process, which the SEC did review, keeps securities off the platform. Now, just yesterday, I talked to Ari Redboard of TRM Labs about whether some of the tokens listed on Coinbase were considered securities. You can find that interview over at cnbc.com/cryptoworld. Next, Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX continue to buy up crypto companies. The latest potential acquisition is Bithumb, a cryptocurrency exchange based in South Korea. The owner of the company tweeted that talks were being held between Bithumb and FTX, and though nothing was decided yet, the two companies were discussing all options, including partnership or full acquisition. SBF scooped up BlockFi for $240 million last month, and its companies have lent out millions in emergency funding during the downturn. Last up, Chipotle is giving away crypto. The restaurant announced yesterday that through the end of July, customers will be able to play the Buy the Dip game, in which the company is giving away $200,000 in crypto, including Bitcoin, Ether, Solana, and more. Chipotle now accepts crypto through payments platform Flexa, but the process is a little complicated. To make a payment in store, you have to download a separate app and deposit just the right amount of crypto for your purchase. If you put in too much, well, there's no withdrawal feature. Oh, and a burrito purchase is still a taxable event. All right, for our main story of the day, we wanted to turn our attention to Texas. Crypto miners are coming back online after the record heat wave that strained the state's power grid. I spoke to Steve Bassi, co-founder and CEO of PolySwarm, about the impact of that heat wave on miners and whether the mining business could change as extreme weather becomes more common.
So looking back on the last few months, how much of an impact did the energy shortages and extreme heat have on crypto miners in Texas?
Sure. I think there's a lot of things going on there. One is you see it in other Western states, the drought and the reduction in hydropower. So that's a big concern, especially with the heat. And then obviously in Texas, air conditioning usage is going to go up. And I think what people don't realize is crypto miners, use anywhere between 2,000 and 5,000 watts of power per miner, which is about the same as your stove. So imagine if, thousands of stoves at any one time were being turned on to mine cryptocurrency.
So a lot of these proof of work miners will actually voluntarily power down their operations at times of peak demand. How has this been working out, especially in the last month of summer in Texas?
Yeah, I think it's fine because, with the base load on the grid already, right? The miners have very fine grained control over how many units are powered on at any given time. And they're able to sort of power down both to protect their own economic interest, because I assume they're having some sort of demand-based pricing in there. So it's simply not profitable for them to mine during an emergency effectively. No matter the outside economic conditions. I think the other thing that's important to realize is that the grid operators actually have pretty decent control over who's receiving power off the grid. So that over substations and various other control mechanisms, utility operators can actually brown out or black out, down to a city block or that sort of thing. So a lot of these crypto miners in Texas are using sort of high capacity areas of the grid. So think where a former steel mill might have been. So I think it's pretty easy for the grid operators to actually protect the retail customers, the hospitals, the sort of the critical infrastructure. If the miners don't voluntarily draw down their usage during times of peak demand.
A question I often get is, why do we even need extra demand on the grid? Why are these proof of work crypto miners a good thing for Texas? Can you kind of get into that dynamic?
Sure. So my personal view on this is that they're actually accelerating the demand for more reliable renewables, right? So there's a lot of talk about what's going to meet the base load when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing, and the answer there is probably nuclear. So by sort of increasing the base load and the demand on the grid, right, I think these miners in a way are encouraging us to think of those solutions sooner rather than later. And luckily, because I don't think most of the society would view crypto mining as a emergency or critical usage of the grid, right? We're doing it in an environment where we can sort of turn down the demand on the grid from the crypto miners or less critical services rather than and sort of experiment with upping that base load over time.
And for those who aren't aware of what base load demand is, can you break that down?
Sure, that's it's basically during the time of the day, the sort of the load on the grid that's commonly seen. Say 7 p.m. in Texas, right? The common base load is going to be everybody with their, stoves on, the lights at home on, preparing dinner, maybe washing some clothes, that sort of thing.
And the way that I understand it is that overnight, when people don't have their TVs on, they aren't powering up all of their devices, there's less demand. And so that's when it's good to have something like a proof of work crypto miner using grid power, because it helps to add demand when there's less appetite for it. Why is it good that there is always some sort of demand on the grid?
Sure, a few things. One, so the other thing to consider at night is the sun isn't shining, right? And sometimes the wind isn't blowing. So there's reduced production from renewables at night to sort of go along with that slack demand. Which I think is what a lot of the argument is also about. You saw this with New York and their ban on crypto miners, and the main concern there was that they were using a bunch of fossil fuels. So it's a good thing to increase demand and increase load on the grid because it'll accelerate our trend of thinking of renewables that work when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, right? So that's the nice part of that.
A lot of people think that when you add renewable power sources to an energy grid, whether it's wind power or solar power, it's automatically a good thing. But that's not necessarily the case, because these kinds of energy inputs are very volatile. And so you need something to balance that out. And I'm wondering if you can just briefly explain where Bitcoin miners factor into that equation.
Consider a few things. One, we can turn these Bitcoin miners up on a dime, right? So, we can turn, I think Riot blockchain is doing one of the largest plants in Texas. They're at over a gigawatt, right? So if you have a particularly sunny day or a lot of wind is blowing, right, that's putting a huge amount of energy into the grid, right? So the folks at one of these large Bitcoin mines can actually turn up their miners to absorb some of that load. And what this is going to do is several things. One, it's going to protect the grid from being overloaded by this sudden input generation, right? Two, it's going to actually increase the lifetime of the turbines and the other sort of fossil fuel related stuff, because large turbines that power the grid, natural gas and otherwise, they take a while to spin up and slow down because they're large machines and they're very expensive. So doing that reliably and safely.
So right now the cost of energy is high, the price of Bitcoin is low. That's cutting into profit margins for a lot of these Bitcoin miners. What do you think that means for the industry right now?
I've got a pretty long view on this. So I started Bitcoin mining in 2011, and I was living in Tokyo, Japan at the time, which, as you know, the energy costs in Japan are pretty high because it's an island and they have to import all their fuel and energy and stuff like that. And this was when Bitcoin was, sub $1, if you can believe that. And there was no dedicated Bitcoin mining hardware. So we were doing things like repurposing old graphics processing units out of computers to actually mine this stuff. So I think if these Bitcoin mining companies have a long enough horizon and they have a good operational runway, they'll be able to capitalize on these price swings in Bitcoin to when it's back at 60, 100,000, whatever these price swings are. If they're able to hold sort of the coins that they mine and also cover their operational costs in the meantime, I think they'll be profitable in the long run.
Okay, that's all for Crypto World today, but we will be back again tomorrow, and we'll see you then.